Welcome to Marcos and James, the Lisbon Pirates podcast. Good morning, Tiago.
Good morning, Mark.
How
do you feel?
I'm doing good. I'm excited because we have two Tiagos.
Yeah, if one Tiago is a big problem,
we went and arranged another one.
Yeah, we brought another one. So introduce our guest today.
Well, yeah. So
how should we present him?
Well, everybody knows he's Tiago, so we'll introduce him as Tiago Oliveira, or James number 2. Yeah. I don't know. We can give him the James number.
A renowned theologian in the making right now because he's studying in your country, Mark.
I think we could probably just go ahead and call him a theologian. Tiago, what do you think?
Yeah, of course. You're already a theologian.
You do whatever you want. Your podcast.
Well, welcome to the show, Tiago. We're glad that you're here. Where we want to obviously utilize our time with you and ask you some questions. And really, I thought maybe what we'd do this morning is if you ever watched the movie Being John Malkovich?
Yeah, I never watched it. But remember when we had Jacinto Lucas Pires, we called Being Jacinto Lucas Pires.
Exactly. So it's kind of like the same thing. We're going to be like,
Being Tiago Oliveira.
And we're going to get into his mind and ask him some questions.
The mind is a very dangerous thing.
So Tiago, for our listeners, Tiago number 2, of course. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing right now, why you're in the United States. Obviously, you're Portuguese. Yeah. A lot of people know you. People who listen to the podcast will know who you are. Yeah. So I hope that's okay.
Okay. Just saying, I went to the U.S. in 2012 to study at RTS Jackson, MDiv program. I've completed it and graduated 2016. I've stopped for 1 year as I was preparing my application for the PhD. I was accepted, and now I'm just enrolled at Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary, planning to come back to Portugal in the summer 2021, God's willing. I received the call and accepted for First Baptist Lisbon, and the goal also is to be and use a good amount of my time starting a new theological school, because that was the main goal that brought me to the U.S. The goal is to come back, be involved in a church-based theological school in partnership with Lapa. And so these are our plans. Yeah. I'm currently pastoring a church in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
Although we have a full-time pastor, I'm one of the elders.
Right. Okay, so how long have you been in the United States right now? How many years?
6.5.
6.5. Okay, so tell our listeners 1 or 2 things that you still find shocking after being in the United States for 6.5 years. What's still weird about the United States for you?
Well, I'm in the South, so that's particular.
That's weird in and of itself.
Well, actually, in my case, have in mind that I'm a conservative European going to the South.
Okay, interesting.
So in many regards, I have much more positive things to say about the South than negative.
Okay, interesting.
Now, of course, one of the difficult things always to deal in the South is that everybody loves Jesus.
Right.
Whatever they mean by it.
Whoever that Jesus is.
and so that conversation is very difficult.
Right.
Okay. And then the other aspect that perhaps I would say that is very difficult for me to deal with is the way that Christians deal with politics.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And how politics and the church are still, in my opinion, still too confused.
Right. And as a European, and Tiago and I have talked a lot about this, this kind of brings a little bit of a shock to you when you see that happen within the church, correct?
Yeah. So those are probably 2 areas that are still very difficult for me to deal with. I don't even know how to, in the streets, to speak with people concerning faith, because it's a completely different dynamic than in here. Yeah. On one hand, people talk about religion in a very natural way, but it's very difficult to go to deeper levels because everybody will tell you, "Oh, I love Jesus also, great." So how you go from there to deeper conversations?
It's interesting. We actually call that a conversation stopper. So whenever there's a response like that, it just shuts down the conversation, and it's very difficult then to continue the conversation about faith. And so what we talk about, just thinking missiologically, is how can we ask questions then to help people continue to talk about faith, even when they're using conversation stoppers?
Yeah, which is a very interesting thing, because in a way, in a place like America, very different. If we are talking about Jesus, is very different from Europe, right? Because in Europe, people will not say to you that they love Jesus.
Right.
It is very natural for them to even say the name. As a European Christian pastor, sometimes I'm the one that I'm kind of uncomfortable if someone in a public sphere speaks Jesus so naturally.
Okay, Tiago number 1. I am so excited to hear this, only because Tiago number 2, it means that he's not completely American.
Yeah.
So this is good. This is really good.
And one of the fascinating things about going to America, and of course, we are talking about the South because America is too big and it's not the same thing everywhere. But one of the things I find fascinating about American culture is that, and in that sense, I believe that American culture just spread all over the world. But sometimes talking about loving something, okay, right now we are talking about loving Jesus, but I've been trying to end the book. I've been writing for 1 year now, and I'm trying to write about love is the more difficult thing in the world. It's really the more difficult thing in the world, and we inhabit a world that takes love for granted, and so it's such a shock,
right?
Because like you were saying, if someone takes love very easily, you have a big problem, because love it's really substantial for our Christian faith, and it's the opposite. It's not an easy thing. It's a very difficult thing. It called for a sacrifice of our Lord. Yeah. So sometimes when you talk to people and they will present themselves as loving, they can love Jesus or they can love any other thing, but you always have a hard time when you find someone who takes himself or herself as a loving person. That's one of the more difficult things to engage when you preach the gospel, because you have to explain, don't go so fast thinking about yourself as a loving person, because probably you are wrong. And so, and it's funny because in America, like you were saying, it's difficult because they will say they love Jesus, and so.
Well, and you see the huge difference between like an American perspective and a European perspective. European being much more realistic, and an American being much more idealistic, right? And so that, of course, that comes into play even with things like faith and talking about love and talking about Jesus even, right? Yeah. So, well, Tiago number 1.
Yeah, and let me just say, full disclosure. I love to say this word, this expression, full disclosure. Tiago is my brother-in-law.
That's true. So, that's true.
He is.
Are you disclosing that because?
Just because it would be a great miss.
Oh, if you didn't say that, right?
Yeah, he's my brother-in-law.
Yeah,
I have to say that.
I thought you were like gonna
I wanted to
he's
use
my brother-in-law, so.
No, you go ahead.
Listen more, listen less. I don't know. You know how brother-in-laws can be, but you guys are pretty close, right? As far as brother-in-laws go.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are, because. Even before Tiago went to America, he was a pastor here. And you should talk a little bit about that, because you were a pastor before going to America, and right now you're a pastor there. And
before you do, I want to ask you one question. As brother-in-laws, what do you fight about most?
Theology?
Theologically.
Theology, because although...
It's just because Tiago is always wrong. I need to correct him. Every time I come here, I have a very short time to correct all his mistakes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
He's already an American. He's coming to Europe and solving all our problems.
From that regard, I'm kind of an American.
Yeah, he's already
an American. I come here to fix stuff.
Yeah. We were waiting for you, Tiago.
And I do have an answer for all these questions.
And this is
is very American, exactly.
It's so precious, because right now, Mark, who's the real American here, is
I'm the least American here.
Yeah, now he's a European. He's not going after people and telling them what they should do, or.
No, I just keep saying.
We try to do.
I just keep saying it's so complicated. I just don't know. Right? I mean, how could you even say that, right? I've been hanging around Tiago number 1 too long. Okay, well, actually, I want to ask Tiago Oliveira, I want to ask you, being a pastor in Portugal, like Tiago was referencing, when you're coming back to visit now after being in the United States for almost 7 years, as a former pastor here, and as, I mean, you continue to be a pastor there, but then you're going to come back and be a pastor here and continue to work with this theological school that we're going to open, all this kind of stuff. When you're coming back to visit Portugal, what are some things that are shocking to you that you're still finding culturally or
on
within,
this side?
Yeah, on this side. Yeah, when you come back and visit.
Well, I think. Well, let's see if the listener. I think you will be able to understand me. So help me to put this in words so that the people that are listening can understand what I want to say. Usually, people think about difficult places in the world to serve,
right,
as the places where you are physically persecuted,
right,
and things like that.
Like Afghanistan.
Yeah, I would
Iran.
say that because of the historical cultural situation that we're living in Europe, and particularly in Portugal, in our context here, serving in Portugal is tremendously difficult and
right,
spiritually very demanding, because you are. It's the fact that you need to start the process of evangelization proper. I'm not saying to the point of conversion,
right,
but evangelization in the sense of preaching the gospel fully. And I'm thinking about Matthew 28 here.
Yeah.
That you evangelize not only by bringing people to faith, but by teaching them after they come to faith. And church in Portugal is very immature and spiritually immature. And so on that regard, your first role is within the church itself. And it's spiritually very demanding.
Right.
Because the church is many times not a help for the pastor, is actually more a mission field.
Yeah.
And sometimes in pastoral ministry, particularly with the fact that also in human resources, we don't have the abundance that, for example, in the United States you have. You can be very lonely, and at a certain point, completely. You don't have anything else to give. You feel almost dead.
Right.
And so you tend to crash at a certain point, asking many times if it is worthwhile, because it starts in the church itself.
Yeah, and so you're continuing to see this. This hasn't changed over the years.
Oh no, I don't.
Okay.
I don't think even in the church itself, people are very cynical and skeptical concerning the basic things of faith.
Right.
So it's in the church that you fight skepticism and cynicism.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't
And isn't
have a
that
body.
interesting? That's interesting because most people would probably say you have to fight cynicism and skepticism outside of the church, and they would never think to even question about the inside of the church or members or.
But just a little bit of pushback, and I want it to be fair. But yeah, aren't you probably presenting that reality mostly coming from the fact that you, we three, us three, we come from a Baptist background. So if we were
perhaps.
talking,
I'm talking about my experience.
Yeah,
I'm not. Okay. That is a good pushback in the sense that I'm speaking about the reality in which I serve.
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't want to make here a huge statement that every event that this is common in every single evangelical environment.
And I just asked this because I was last week I was watching a TV program about religion, and the numbers that were presented were different from the ones that we are used to. There was a calculation about evangelicals being around 5%. Generally, we stick to 1%.
1%, yeah, that's strange.
But one of the good things, even if I'm not debating the number, but I'm just thinking, let's accept this 5% number. Of course, we would have to count every Pentecostal church, neo-Pentecostal, and even probably Igreja Universal do Reino de Deus. I'm not debating about if they are a real Christian church or not, but just to trying to have a broader perspective about the evangelical church in Portugal. And if we Baptists are a minority inside evangelical churches, I wouldn't say that Pentecostal churches have such a cynical environment like Baptist ones have.
Probably because they have other challenges to deal with. But it is something that I found very different there. That's why I say I have much more good things to say about the South than negative. Being a conservative guy coming from Europe, a Baptist conservative guy, because people in the South, and not only in my circles, generally speaking, they're still believers as a default. Okay, the ideas and ideals are still something that moves people. They are still convinced by them. I remember preaching. We were raising some funds to our future building, and I remember telling to my co-pastor, Pastor Thomas Wynn, and after I preached and after people made the commitments, etc., 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 he even cried when we were made aware of how much we had raised. And at a certain point, I told him, I was in some sense joking, but I was very serious at the same time. And I told him, I realized that I need to be very careful here in the United States when I preach, because people actually believe what I say.
Wow, interesting.
Because
fundamental difference.
Of course, I was saying this with a smile in my face, but I was being very serious because it's one of the things that sometimes in my experience in pastoral ministry and in Portugal is saying the same things over and over and over again, and people basically simply don't care what is being said, or might even think that is interesting, but because they are not believers at their core, they are very cynical, and they tend to not take it very seriously.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting.
You see, even in terms of counseling, okay.
Sure.
When I need to counsel someone, and when someone, actually it's very common that people, much more common than here, that people come to ask my advice on a particular issue. And when they come, again, I can use the same expression. I need to be careful because they will do what I tell them
what you
to
say.
do. Here, they almost come to ask your advice to see if you agree with them, and if you agree with them, that's fine.
They will feel happy about
it.
But if not,
if not, it's fine. I'll do the same thing anyway. Do you see what I mean? Of course, that I'm generalizing, and this is not that simple even there. But people are believers, while here people are cynical and skeptical.
Do you think that has a lot to do with just the way people look at the role of pastor here? Or, I mean, obviously the bigger theme here is the cynicism and skepticism, but they're bringing that to bear upon the role too here, right? Tiago, do you see that happening here, just the devaluation of the role of pastor as well?
Yeah, for us, the concept of authority, it really unleashes some ghosts in Europe. Because of our political history, and in America, being a recent country, it's a different historical experience. So authority still has a way to present itself as a positive thing. Although we know that in the more intellectual elites, America is getting just like Europe is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is so inside of ourselves here in Europe that's not even a conscious thing. So, but you tend to suspect, always suspect when thinking about authority, even if you're inside a church. Of course, there will be differences, and I was calling for some appreciation of the differences,
sure.
because Pentecostals, they do their thing in a different way than we as Baptists do, but in general it's a very different thing.
I hope not to be misunderstood here.
Sure.
But it comes to my mind sometimes, very interestingly, and have into consideration how poor we are in Portugal in terms of the dimension of the churches and our relevance and even our spiritual maturity. But it comes to mind sometimes that every time I visit, I'm more respected as a nobody in the United States than a somebody in Portugal.
That's very
that will be the thing.
That's the title. That's the title. Yeah, that's fantastic.
But you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
In the
Strangely
church
enough.
that I'm in, particularly, that has a high view of authority,
Right.
even if people disagree with me,
Right.
the respect that they will have concerning the things I say will be completely different. Every time I come here, and I exercise, it's the same sermons.
Right.
I'm saying exactly the same things, but people tend to receive it more as a matter of opinion, and not as a matter of preaching the word.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask both of you this question then, because I think this has a lot of relevance to the conversation. And this is one thing that we've tried to do in this podcast every single time, is to say then, how does the gospel come to bear on a culture that is skeptical or resistant? What does the gospel do in this case? And what do we want to expect from the gospel here in Portugal with these things that we're talking about, Tiago?
You go.
You can start first.
No, probably your words will have more wisdom than mine. I will try to follow up.
No, I can say this. I'm having consideration. I might not be answering that question fully, but I'm now reading and studying the book of Job. That's what I'm preaching upon. And every time I'm reading Job, comes to my mind, I think it was Martin Lloyd-Jones that said, a Christian is someone whom God shut his mouth.
Interesting.
And it has to do with it. I'm reading Job over and over again, and God refuses to answer any of the questions that Job and his friends have put on the table.
Right.
God doesn't answer any of them. The end of the book is exactly that. Job has his mouth shut.
Right.
Which is a very humbling result, having into consideration that he was the most upright, the holiest of men on earth.
Right.
That he did nothing to deserve
Exactly.
What he received, and still in his complaint, because he was trying to justify himself instead of trying to justify God, when God enters into the scene, he says, I set the tone here. I ask the questions. I'm the one. And for me personally, because have into consideration that I'm in the U.S. but I'm still a European,
right.
And sometimes I'm seeing their credulity and I'm pointing fingers at how, because a European typically tends to see American credulity or the fact that they are so easy prone to believe that we tend to say they're stupid.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel
Or
that
at
in
least
my heart.
they don't understand reality.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
They are not sophisticated enough.
Right.
Yeah.
They are too simplistic. You see? And by reading Job, and by coming to the gospel, by coming now to the incarnation and to our Lord's life, death, and resurrection, that before that, our mouth is shut.
Yeah. Good.
And I think that's since we're talking about authority and those things, I think that it's one of the things that the gospel can do most for us. it can shut our mouth.
Good, good.
I would just add, and I'm still trying to answer your question. It's a really great question, and I don't feel able to answer everything that.
Well, Tiago just told you to shut your mouth. So, I mean, I don't know what you want to add here, but I mean, it's pretty clear. Oh, Tiago's in stitches.
That's note to self.
Note to self.
That I have in my bedroom.
Yeah.
Falar menos.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Because it's a huge thing. But I would just add that even having said that, I'm going to add something.
You still have something to say.
As a good European.
As a European, you still have something to say.
No, because one of the things that I really find different is that in trying to say it's not I wasn't called to preach that American culture is the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things that I find really humble about American culture, and although lots of the times we don't think about Americans as we cannot, it will depend. But
they don't come across as humble, that's for sure.
But they believe in judgment. And that's, for me, that's a thing. I think I've told this story before. Sometimes I go and I read some or listen something about coming from N.T. Wright, and I really think is a you cannot live in this century studying theology and not having to engage with N.T. Wright. But one of the things that
even if it is to say that he's wrong.
Even if it is to say, like John MacArthur said, anti-wrong and not anti-right. But in lots of ways, he's really. I think everyone should have to deal with it.
At least interact with it. Yeah.
But one of the things that I really find anti-right being unfair about American culture is that he always portrays American culture's fascination about hell as a bad thing. And I really find it a humble thing, because if you, as an American, can believe, although you can be very credulous, but if you can believe that you can be judged to hell, that's a great deal of humility. And so in Europe, you won't find that.
Right.
Well, it has to do also with the fact, I think, and of course it has its pitfalls, and I live them in the South. It has to do with the fact that an American will still believe that what you sow is what you reap.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
right or wrong.
There is a right and wrong, and what you
and
do
you
actually has an outcome on the other side. Okay, let me put things in our daily lives. Okay, in Portugal, the typical reaction, for example, if someone is wealthy, is to say the guy did something that he shouldn't, or you don't admire someone. In the United States,
or he's living at someone else's
expenses or something like that. In the United States, if someone is wealthy or successful, people say, "I want to hear him." Doesn't matter even if I don't like him.
He did something.
He did something to get there. He got there because he
Right.
did something that I want to know.
Right.
You see,
So
it
there's
has
respect,
these two.
Yeah.
Everything in Portuguese culture is circumstantial.
But
Things happen to us because of our conditions. Because something happened outside of myself. Okay, in the American culture is that I do something in order to achieve something. So if I achieve something, it's because I did something. It has, of course, its pitfalls.
Yes,
okay?
absolutely.
Like I can tell you this: the
be,
typical thing is that if someone, for example, is homeless, it's because he did something wrong.
Right.
Okay, so this is a bad thing. It has its pitfalls, but it has the bigger picture that is right. Okay, the maxim is right. What you sow is what you reap.
So I would this is a very big simplification. I would say that in some ways, American culture, and of course, American culture sometimes still has to learn more about grace. Although grace is such a big thing for American culture, but grace in terms of that life is more that you get out of it. And, but for Europeans, we have to struggle on justice. On God is just, and so we are going to be judged. So life is not necessarily random, and we portray life as a random thing.
Right.
And so there are different things. Yeah.
Well, and what I absolutely love is even when we get into these conversations and talks, one thing that is so evident is that each culture does desperately need the gospel.
Yeah.
And needs Jesus. And so one of the things that we just want to continue to do is continue to preach that and continue to teach that and continue to come back to the gospel and say, what is the gospel doing in this culture to redeem it and to bring it closer to an understanding of who Jesus is and what Jesus' kingdom is all about. So that's what we want to do. And so you're always welcome to come by and come hang out with us at Lapa. Sundays at 11:30 a.m. is our service time. Yeah. And so we'd love to see you here.
Yeah. How long?